Some stories from the darkest corners of the internet begin with a message on a screen. Others begin with a stranger at the door. This one began with a phone call that made a young woman realize someone she had never seen might already be planning the end of her life. Avery Stone was 18 and had only recently earned the freedom that comes with having a car of your own. Her parents had surprised her with a bright red sedan after she passed her driving test, and she was still getting used to the feeling of being able to go anywhere without asking for a ride. One warm afternoon, Avery was sitting behind the wheel with her boyfriend, Mason Reed, in the passenger seat. They had stopped for something to eat and were enjoying the easy kind of day that feels endless when you are young. Then Avery's phone began to buzz. The caller identification showed no name. Normally, she might have ignored it. Instead, out of curiosity, she answered. The man on the other end introduced himself as a deputy with the local sheriff's department. He asked Avery to come to the sheriff's office as soon as she safely could. Her stomach tightened immediately. She asked what she had done. The deputy told her she was not in trouble, but his voice carried enough urgency that the reassurance did not help. Avery drove directly to the department. When she arrived, officers moved her into an interview room with a speed that frightened her more than the phone call had. At first, she believed there had to be some mistake. Maybe the deputy had the wrong name. Maybe her car had been connected to something she knew nothing about. Maybe someone had reported her by accident. Then the officers sat down with her and explained the truth as carefully as they could. There was a credible threat against her life. Someone had gone onto a hidden online marketplace and tried to pay for her murder. Avery stared at them. She asked the obvious question. Who? The deputies did not know. That was the reason they had moved so quickly. The person behind the request had used an anonymous account on a dark web murder-for-hire site. The user called themselves Mastermind 365. They had entered the site through an anonymity network designed to hide location and identity. At first, the user asked whether it was possible to arrange a kidnapping instead of a killing. The site administrator replied that kidnapping could be arranged, but the price would be higher because keeping a victim alive created additional risk. The user disappeared for a while. When they returned, their request had changed. They no longer wanted Avery kidnapped. They wanted her dead. The account then transferred more than 5,000 United States dollars in Bitcoin and uploaded a photograph of Avery. That photograph was enough to turn an anonymous online conversation into a terrifyingly specific threat. Police escorted Avery home. Investigators believed that if a real contract killer had accepted the job, that person would probably spend time studying her routine before making any move. That gave law enforcement some time. It also gave Avery and her family time to prepare. Her parents installed a sophisticated home security system. They bought a powerful canister of defensive spray. Avery enrolled in mixed martial arts training. Mason bought a large fishing knife because he wanted something available if everything else failed. None of those things made Avery feel safe. They only made the danger feel more real. Because of the seriousness of the threat, federal investigators soon joined the local deputies. The local department continued doing much of the groundwork, but the broader investigation was now being coordinated by agencies with more resources. Avery was asked the same question repeatedly. Who might want to hurt you? At first, she could think of no one. Then investigators noticed a change in her face. A name had occurred to her. Sometime earlier, Avery had ended an online relationship with a young British man named Callum Price. Callum had not reacted well to the breakup. He had seemed hurt, angry, emotionally unstable. But Avery still struggled to imagine him arranging her death. She told investigators that Callum was sensitive. He could barely handle the sight of blood. He disliked violent movies. The idea of him paying someone to commit murder seemed impossible. Federal agents wrote down the name anyway. Then they told Avery they would contact her when they knew more. The days that followed were miserable. Avery began watching everyone. People in parking lots, cars that seemed to appear too often, strangers who looked at her for too long. She checked behind vehicles, looked beneath them, studied reflections in store windows. The worst part was not knowing what she was supposed to be looking for. A professional killer would not wear a sign. Avery later explained that the fear was constant, because danger could look completely ordinary. But one question still remained. How had a small local sheriff's department learned about a murder request hidden on the dark web? The warning did not begin with the Department of Homeland Security. It did not begin with the Central Intelligence Agency. It did not even begin with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It began with a British cybercrime researcher named Nolan Mercer. Nolan spent years investigating hidden online marketplaces and criminal networks. He was what many people call a white hat hacker. Instead of using technical knowledge to steal or exploit, he used it to expose. He regularly explored the most dangerous corners of the dark web and wrote about what he found. During one investigation, Nolan discovered a site claiming to be operated by an international criminal organization. The site offered murder for hire. For enough cryptocurrency, customers were told they could arrange assaults, kidnappings, and killings. Nolan had seen sites like this before. Most were frauds. Some were jokes built by programmers. Others were scams designed to take money from angry people who would never admit to police what they had tried to buy. Nolan wrote a short article calling the site fake. Then he went to sleep. The next morning, an unusual email appeared. The sender called himself Yuri. He claimed to operate the site Nolan had criticized. Instead of threatening Nolan, Yuri offered him Bitcoin to remove the article. Nolan assumed the offer was another scam and refused. Then another message arrived from a different address. The sender again claimed to be Yuri. This time, the email included a link to a video. Nolan opened it. The video showed an old car in an abandoned-looking area. A masked person approached the vehicle, poured fuel over it, and set it on fire. Then the masked figure held a handwritten message toward the camera. The note referenced Nolan's cybercrime blog directly. The threat was simple. "We know who you are." Nolan admitted later that the video unsettled him. Instead of backing away, he became more determined. He focused his efforts on getting the site shut down. Eventually, he succeeded. Then another site appeared. He helped expose that one too. Then there were more. 2 sites, 3. Then so many variations that taking one down barely slowed the network. The names changed. The design changed. But the system stayed similar. A customer created an anonymous account linked to a cryptocurrency wallet. Then they selected a violent service from a menu. Different options came with different prices. The customer uploaded information about the intended target, usually a name, an address, a recent photograph. Then they waited for the site operator to claim the job was being arranged. Some of these sites even looked like ordinary online businesses. There were recruitment pages for people claiming to want to work as killers. There were frequently asked question sections. There were customer service messages. The absurd normality of the design made the sites seem fake, and many probably were. But Nolan discovered something more troubling. Even if the people running the sites were scammers, many customers were completely serious. They were sending real money, real names, real photographs, real instructions. That meant the sites could still become part of real crimes. A murder request did not become harmless simply because the person receiving the cryptocurrency had no intention of carrying it out. The person who placed the order still wanted someone dead. Another case showed just how dangerous that could become. A user with a bizarre screen name created an account and paid thousands of dollars in cryptocurrency for the death of a woman named Rachel Alden. Rachel was a dog trainer living in Minnesota. The customer uploaded details about her work, her family, her child's routine, her husband's schedule. The site operator claimed the killing could be disguised as an accident, a traffic collision, a fire, something that would not immediately look like murder. But nothing happened. The customer became impatient. They sent angry messages asking why the job had not been completed. The messages made clear that the target was Rachel, and Rachel alone. The customer specifically asked that her husband and child not be harmed. Later, a hacker gained access to data from one of the murder-for-hire sites and sent the information to law enforcement. Rachel's name appeared in the files. Agents rushed to warn her. Her husband, Derek Alden, responded by strengthening security at their home. He installed an advanced alarm system. He purchased a firearm. He learned how to use it. From the outside, Derek appeared to be a frightened husband, doing everything possible to protect his wife. Rachel must have believed the same thing. Then months later, Derek killed her. Investigators discovered that he had been living a hidden life. He had used websites to arrange affairs. He wanted out of the marriage, but because of his position as a religious elder, divorce threatened his reputation and identity. He had also arranged a large life insurance policy on Rachel. Then he created an account on a murder-for-hire site. The strange username connected to the original request was his. The messages between Derek and the site operator became crucial evidence. He had first tried to outsource the killing. When that failed, he did it himself. He attempted to make Rachel's death appear self-inflicted. The digital evidence told a different story. He was eventually convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The case also revealed a frustrating problem. Cybercrime investigations often cross national borders. A hacker in one country might discover evidence connected to a victim in another. But law enforcement agencies do not always agree about what evidence can be accepted. Some investigators refuse material gathered through unauthorized access. Others redirect foreign tips through complicated national channels. That can create delays. And when a human life is at risk, delay matters. Nolan Mercer experienced the danger personally. At one point, police raided his home because the dark web operator had spread false information suggesting Nolan himself was the person running the criminal sites. The false trail included details close enough to Nolan's real life that investigators believed it. Armed officers arrived. Nolan was arrested. He spent nights in a cell before police realized they had been manipulated. The experience proved that the person behind the sites understood more than technology. He understood how to weaponize suspicion. Back in Minnesota, Avery Stone received almost no useful updates. Police promised increased patrols. She rarely saw them. The uncertainty took over her life. She left community college. She quit her job at a movie theater. She stopped driving alone. She stopped going places by herself. The freedom she had felt after getting her new car disappeared almost overnight. The only place she felt truly safe was at Mason's home. During those long hours with nothing to do but think, Avery began reconsidering Callum Price. He was older than she was. He had a stable job in accounting. He had money. He had access to the amount of cryptocurrency used in the murder request. And although she once believed him incapable of violence, she began remembering things she had minimized before. Callum had traveled from the United Kingdom to Minnesota to visit her. The trip had started well. Then his behavior changed. He became controlling, moody, emotionally manipulative. When Avery wanted to spend time with friends, he made cutting comments. When she went without him, he became angry. Her parents had welcomed him into their home. He showed little gratitude. By the end of the visit, Avery had decided the relationship needed to end. She told him clearly. He tried to convince her she was confused. He said she was making a mistake. He guilted her, told her he would never find anyone else, tried to make her responsible for his pain. Avery left the conversation feeling manipulated. Then investigators found details that seemed to point in his direction. The anonymous dark web user had unusual language habits that sounded more British than American. The same account tried to obtain an illegal firearm through dark web channels, something less necessary for someone who could legally purchase certain firearms in the United States. And the most troubling detail came from the timing of the messages. The person behind the murder request changed the plan from kidnapping to killing on the same day Avery told Callum she had a new boyfriend. The pattern seemed obvious, yet no criminal charge was brought against Callum. No conviction tied him directly to the account, and the administrators behind the murder-for-hire sites remained difficult to identify. That uncertainty became one of the most disturbing parts of the entire story. Were these sites fake? Some almost certainly were. But fake marketplaces can still attract real people with real murderous intent. And sometimes, names connected to those sites later appear in cases that are much harder to explain. A young soldier named Caleb Harrow was found dead on a rural baseball field in Indiana. He had suffered a single gunshot wound. A firearm was found nearby. Authorities initially treated the death as self-inflicted. Then investigators learned Caleb's name had appeared on a kill list connected to one of the dark web sites. A user had offered thousands of dollars in Bitcoin for his death. That did not prove the site operator had arranged the killing. The person who wanted Caleb dead could have contacted multiple people, online and offline. There was another disturbing detail. Not long before his death, Caleb changed the beneficiary of his life insurance policy to a female companion. Her identity was never publicly released. Caleb's father later questioned whether his son's death had truly been self-inflicted. He wondered whether the dark web request had been connected to something much darker. No definitive answer resolved that question. Other cases elsewhere in the world showed that anonymous online payments could lead to real violence. In Russia, teenagers were arrested for the murder of a police officer known for pursuing narcotics traffickers. The killers had been paid anonymously in Bitcoin. They never met the person who ordered the attack. That case was not proven to be connected to Yuri's specific network, but it demonstrated the underlying danger. Online systems can connect people who want violence with people willing to carry it out. The customer can remain hidden. The person committing the crime may know almost nothing about who ordered it. That makes these networks difficult to investigate and even harder to prevent. Nolan's investigation into the murder-for-hire network became almost an obsession. The sites were strange because they borrowed the language of normal online commerce. Customers were told to create accounts. They were given menus. They could ask questions before paying. They received messages that sounded like customer support. Some pages even included recruitment sections, where people claiming to have military or criminal experience could apply to work as contractors. The absurd professionalism made the sites easier to dismiss. One frequently asked question asked whether women could be targeted. The administrator answered in the same flat tone someone might use to explain shipping delays. Some contractors might refuse certain jobs. That could create delays. The language was horrifying precisely because it sounded so ordinary. Nolan began to understand that the real threat was not whether every advertised killer existed. The real threat was that the sites gathered violent intent in one place. Someone furious at an ex-partner could upload an address. Someone desperate for money could browse the site looking for work. Someone operating a scam could steal the payment. Someone else could copy the target information. A fake marketplace could still become a distribution point for real danger. That possibility changed how Nolan treated every news site. He stopped asking only whether the operator was lying. He began asking what information the operator possessed. Who had paid? Who had been named? Who might be in danger without knowing it? That shift is what ultimately mattered for people like Avery. The dark web administrator who called himself Yuri seemed to enjoy staying one step ahead. When one domain disappeared, another appeared. When investigators identified one digital wallet, new wallets were created. When articles exposed one brand, the network returned under a different name. The design changed just enough to make the news site appear independent. But the same language patterns appeared, the same pricing logic, the same customer service style, the same promises. Nolan and other researchers began treating the sites as part of a connected ecosystem rather than isolated pages. The more they collected, the more disturbing the data became. People from different countries had submitted requests. Some were obviously fantasies. Some were incoherent. Some looked like revenge written in anger. Others were detailed enough to make investigators nervous. Names, home addresses, work schedules, photographs taken from social media, descriptions of cars, children's schools, daily routines, the same information ordinary people post online without thinking can become dangerous when placed in the hands of someone who wants to hurt them. That became another lesson from the investigation. Privacy is not about hiding because you have done something wrong. Sometimes privacy is simply about not giving a stranger a map of your life. Rachel Alden's case became especially important because the murder request did not stay theoretical. The anonymous user gave the site operator information that only someone close to Rachel was likely to know. The details included her work, her routines, her family, the school connected to her child, her husband's schedule. The messages were patient at first, then impatient. The customer wanted results. When the administrator claimed delays, the customer pushed harder. The messages showed determination. They also showed something revealing. The customer repeatedly emphasized that Rachel alone should be harmed, not her husband, not her child. That detail seemed strangely compassionate until investigators understood who had written it. Derek wanted Rachel gone. He did not want to lose his son. He did not want his own life disrupted more than necessary. He wanted a crime designed around convenience. That cold practicality helped investigators understand motive. Derek's religious position also mattered. He was respected in his church community. Divorce would have carried social and personal consequences. He had built an identity around morality while living another life in secret. The affairs, the insurance policy, the murder request, the firearm purchased after Rachel received a warning. Each piece looked different on its own. Together, they told one story. The weapon he claimed to have purchased for protection became the weapon used against her. The security measures became part of the illusion. He did not need to defeat an outside killer. He was the danger already inside the house. When investigators recovered the dark web messages, the case shifted. Those conversations revealed planning that existed before Rachel's death. They showed someone trying to outsource the crime. They showed frustration when the plan failed. They showed intent. Digital evidence did what witnesses sometimes cannot. It preserved a person's private thoughts long after they assumed those thoughts were hidden. That is one reason encrypted communication is not the same thing as disappearing. People make mistakes. Platforms get breached. Wallets can be traced. Devices are seized. Screenshots survive. Copies exist. The trail may be difficult. It is rarely non-existent. Nolan's own arrest also revealed how dangerous misinformation can become during cyber investigations. Yuri planted details suggesting that Nolan was secretly the administrator of the murder-for-hire network. The false information mixed truth with fabrication. Nolan's first name, his profession, a location close enough to his real life. That mixture made the lie believable. When law enforcement acted, Nolan suddenly found himself on the other side of the system he had been trying to help. Armed officers entered. He was detained, questioned, held. The experience was humiliating and frightening. Eventually, investigators realized the evidence had been manipulated. Nolan was released, but the message from Yuri was clear. Research me, and I can make authorities research you. For some people, that would have been enough to stop. Nolan continued. He understood that the threat itself proved the investigation mattered. Avery's case remained unresolved in the most frustrating way. Investigators developed suspicion. They found patterns. But suspicion is not proof. Avery had to live with the knowledge that someone had paid money to have her killed, while also living with the possibility that the person she suspected might never be charged. That kind of uncertainty can become its own sentence. There is no courtroom ending, no verdict, no moment when a judge confirms what happened. Only a young woman rebuilding ordinary life after learning how easily ordinary life can be targeted. The young soldier Caleb Harrow's case carried the same ambiguity. His death was initially classified as self-inflicted. The presence of his name in a dark web kill request raised questions. But a request alone could not prove who pulled the trigger. It could not prove anyone pulled the trigger at all. The dark web connection became a shadow over the official conclusion. His family had to live with that shadow. Sometimes evidence creates answers. Sometimes it creates questions that never go away. The Russian police officer case showed a different model. There, the people who carried out the attack were identified. They had been paid anonymously. They did not know the person who ordered the crime. That arrangement demonstrates why cryptocurrency and anonymous communication can appeal to people trying to distance themselves from violence. The person ordering the attack may never touch a weapon. The person carrying it out may never know the motive. The payment becomes the only bridge. Break that bridge, and investigators may never reach the person at the far end. That is why financial tracing became such an important part of modern cybercrime investigation. The blockchain can offer anonymity, but it also records movement permanently. Money leaves patterns. Investigators learn to follow those patterns the way older detectives followed bank statements, phone bills, and hotel receipts. The tools changed. The detective work did not. The internet did not invent murder for hire. It made distance easier. It made anonymity easier. It made cryptocurrency useful to people who wanted to pretend a financial transaction had no human consequence. And the story of Avery Stone showed why even a fraudulent website can be deadly. A person somewhere believed money could buy her death. That intention was real, even if the killer never was. The next story from the dark web was even more disturbing, because it involved a criminal who did not merely hide behind anonymous messages. He built an entire business around exploiting vulnerable children. Victor Sawyer was born and raised in Australia. Little was publicly known about his childhood. He grew into a successful property developer and made enough money to live extremely well. He had a wife, children, a large home. From the outside, his life looked comfortable and respectable. Then his financial world collapsed. A property development scheme failed. Investors lost millions. Victor and his business partners claimed the money was gone. Investors demanded answers. Legal action followed. Victor insisted the losses could be explained. In reality, investigators later concluded that he had been operating what amounted to a sophisticated investment fraud. Before the truth fully caught up with him, Victor fled Australia using false documents. He eventually built a new identity in the Philippines. At first, he stayed near Manila. Then he moved farther south, aware that major cities were the first places authorities might search. He reached Mindanao and tried to build another life. The money he had taken did not last. Victor liked expensive things. He needed income. He could not easily work legally without exposing his identity. He could not attract legitimate investors. So he turned toward one of the darkest forms of online crime, the sexual exploitation of children. Victor worked with local accomplices. 2 women helped him recruit children from poor communities. Families were sometimes told their children would participate in paid photography. Money was offered. The children would disappear for a short period and then return carrying cash. Many were too frightened to explain what had happened. Some who tried to speak were ignored or silenced. Victor recorded abuse and distributed the material through hidden online communities. He created forums where buyers could pay for increasingly exploitative content. One notorious recording became widely known among investigators because of the severe abuse it depicted. We will not describe that material in detail. What matters is that children were harmed, the abuse was filmed, and money was made from the suffering. Victor charged enormous amounts for certain recordings. The demand encouraged more abuse. That demand is important to understand. People often imagine child exploitation as the work of a small number of isolated predators. But hidden online networks can create a market. A market creates incentives. The people buying the material may never meet the victims. That distance makes it easier for them to pretend they are only consuming files. They are not. Every image has a victim. Every video represents something that happened to a real child. Victor's operation continued for years. Then one of his accomplices, Marisol Vega, began to break with him. She had helped recruit victims. She had participated in crimes. But even she became horrified by the direction Victor was taking. According to later accounts, Victor lured teenage girls to a property using promises of food and alcohol. When the girls realized they were in danger and tried to escape, they were captured. They were threatened in horrifying ways. They were held prisoner. We will not repeat the graphic details. What matters is that Victor used terror to control them. Marisol later discovered the girls being held. Something changed in her. She waited for a moment when Victor was away. Then she freed them. Afterward, she went to police. She told investigators what had been happening. That decision helped open the door to an international investigation. Philippine authorities worked with a specialist Dutch child protection team. The cooperation moved quickly because everyone involved understood the urgency. Cyber investigators penetrated the online network. What they found was overwhelming. The site contained an enormous collection of illegal child exploitation material. Hundreds of thousands of images, potentially thousands of victims. Victor's own productions were only part of it. The larger horror was the scale of demand. His digital wallets contained cryptocurrency worth millions. That money gave investigators some idea of how much business had moved through the network. When police moved to arrest Victor, they coordinated across regions to prevent him from escaping. He was eventually located in a Philippine city and taken into custody. His arrest led investigators toward other offenders. One was another Australian man who operated hidden websites dedicated to extremely violent exploitation material. He used an online pseudonym and claimed his activity was about freedom. Investigators and prosecutors saw something very different. They saw organized abuse, victimization, distribution, and profit. Victor faced a massive number of criminal charges. Most involved trafficking and child exploitation. Other men from different countries were accused of helping with recording and distribution. Some evidence shown during trial was so disturbing that jurors and legal professionals required psychological support afterward. Again, there is no value in repeating the graphic details. The important fact is that the victims were very young. The abuse was severe, and the offenders treated suffering as a product. Officials described the case as one of the worst they had ever encountered. Prosecutors argued for the strongest punishment available. Public anger became so intense that political figures discussed whether the country should restore punishments that had previously been abolished. Victor was eventually convicted and received a life sentence. Later convictions added more than a century of additional prison time. Marisol, whose cooperation helped free victims and expose the crimes, also received a severe sentence because she had participated in the exploitation before turning against Victor. Other accomplices received sentences ranging from years to decades. Victor later complained about prison conditions, overcrowding, limited food, lack of comfort. Prison officials responded bluntly. He wanted conditions closer to what he might have expected in Australia. The prison was not Australia. The facility itself was severely overcrowded, built for only a few hundred prisoners, housing many times that number. Still, public sympathy for Victor was almost non-existent. He had shown so little mercy to vulnerable children that few people felt moved by complaints about his own discomfort. But the most frightening part of his story was not that one predator existed. It was that arresting him barely touched the larger problem. The network continued. Other offenders appeared. New sites replaced old ones. New usernames replaced those that disappeared. For every investigator who shut down one forum, another hidden community might form elsewhere. That is why law enforcement cooperation matters. Cybercrime ignores borders. A victim can be in one country, the offender in another. the server in a third, the payment routed through a fourth. No single police department can solve that alone. The only hopeful part is that the same technology criminals use can also be used against them. Digital wallets leave patterns. Files carry hidden information. Servers make mistakes. Offenders reuse habits. Investigators share intelligence. Victims speak. Witnesses change their minds. And sometimes one person who participated in wrongdoing decides to open a locked door. Victor's path into child exploitation was not sudden. It grew out of other crimes: fraud, deception, flight, false identity. Each successful escape reinforced the idea that rules were for other people. He had already convinced investors to trust him. He had already moved money. He had already fled a country. By the time he reached the Philippines, he had experience living behind a lie. That history mattered. Predatory crime often develops through escalation. Someone crosses one boundary, nothing happens, then another, and another. The absence of consequences becomes mistaken for permission. Victor also chose his environment carefully. Poverty created vulnerability. Families needed money. A promise of paid photography could sound harmless. Parents may have believed their children were being offered legitimate work. That does not make the families responsible for what followed. The deception was designed to exploit need. Victor and his accomplices understood that. They used money not only to recruit, they used it to create silence afterward. A child returning with cash could make adults hesitate to ask questions. A family struggling to survive might fear losing future income. A victim might believe nobody would believe them because money had changed hands. That is one reason exploitation thrives where inequality is severe. Predators look for places where desperation can be turned into control. The hidden forum Victor created became more than a place to upload files. It became a community for offenders. Buyers could communicate, share material, request new content. The demand became increasingly specific. That demand pushed abuse further. Investigators later said the scale of the archive was difficult to comprehend. It was not one collection. It was a network of collections. Material copied from other offenders. Material produced locally. Material exchanged repeatedly. Every duplicate represented another loss of control for a victim. That is why investigators often speak about continued victimization. The abuse may happen once. The recording can be viewed thousands of times. For the victim, the crime can feel as though it never fully ends. The Dutch specialists who helped Philippine police were experienced in tracing online exploitation. They understood that shutting down a website was only the beginning. The goal was identification. Who uploaded? Who purchased? Who communicated? Who appeared in the material? Where the victims were? Which children were still in danger? The international team worked to turn digital information into physical rescue. That transition is one of the hardest parts of cyber investigation. A username does not tell you which door to knock on. An image may contain clues: a wall, a school uniform, a window, a language heard in the background, a product sold only in one region. Investigators build location from fragments. In Victor's case, cooperation accelerated that process. Police did not waste weeks arguing about which country had priority. They shared. That speed mattered. When Victor was arrested, investigators did not consider the operation finished. They used the seized devices and accounts to identify more offenders. One arrest created new leads. Those leads reached other countries. Another Australian offender, much younger than Victor, operated hidden sites dedicated to violent material. He used a pseudonym and presented himself as a defender of absolute freedom. The argument was familiar. Anything should be allowed online. No restrictions, no censorship. Investigators rejected that framing. Freedom does not include the right to create markets around the abuse of children. The victims' rights matter too. Their safety, their privacy, their humanity. Victor's trial became emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. Prosecutors had to decide how much evidence jurors needed to see. Too little. And the seriousness of the crimes could be misunderstood. Too much, and the trial itself could traumatize the people responsible for judging it. Some jurors later sought counseling. Prosecutors admitted the evidence stayed with them. That secondary trauma is another hidden cost of these crimes. Detectives, analysts, prosecutors, judges, technology workers. Someone has to look at the material in order to identify victims and build cases. Specialized teams receive psychological support because repeated exposure can damage mental health. The public rarely sees that part. We see the arrest, the courtroom sketch, the sentence. Behind it are investigators carrying images they wish they had never seen. Officials were especially disturbed that Victor seemed relaxed during parts of the legal process. At times, he laughed or joked with people around him. Observers interpreted that behavior as a sign of how little empathy he had for the damage done. When convictions came, the tone changed. The sentences were severe: life imprisonment, then additional years that ensured release was effectively impossible. His accomplices received different punishments based on their roles. Marisol's case created difficult moral questions. She helped recruit victims. She participated in exploitation. Later, she freed captives and went to police. Her later actions mattered. They did not erase the earlier crimes. The law treated both truths as real. That is often how accountability works. A person can do something courageous after doing something terrible. The courage deserves recognition. The harm still requires consequences. Victor's prison complaints later drew attention because of the contrast. A man accused of depriving children of basic dignity complained about food, space, and comfort. The prison itself was genuinely overcrowded. That fact remained true regardless of who was housed there. Human rights do not disappear because a prisoner is hated. At the same time, public sympathy was limited. People remembered the victims. They remembered that Victor's crimes were motivated partly by profit. He had turned suffering into a business. His case also exposed the danger of believing one arrest solves a market. Remove one seller, demand remains. If buyers continue paying, another seller appears. That is why child protection experts focus on both sides. Identify producers, identify distributors, identify consumers, remove material, rescue victims, educate families, strengthen reporting systems, reduce the shame that keeps children silent. There is no single dramatic victory. It is long work, often invisible, often exhausting. But every interrupted network matters. The next case involved a man whose public life looked almost completely different from Victor Sawyer's. Preston Vale grew up in England in a comfortable family. He was highly intelligent, academically successful. He attended elite schools and became an accomplished researcher. He earned advanced university degrees. He worked in science. He taught. Friends described him as outgoing, funny, energetic, and socially confident. Nothing about his public identity suggested the darkness growing behind a computer screen. While at university, Preston lived in shared housing with other students. At one point, he joked to a female housemate about secretly filming her in a shared bathroom. She laughed because the comment seemed absurd. She assumed it was only his edgy sense of humor. It was not. Preston had actually been filming her. The joke was a disguised confession. Because nobody took it seriously, he learned something dangerous. He could test boundaries without consequences. Over time, his behavior escalated. Preston spent enormous amounts of time on computers. Research already required long hours at a screen. He became comfortable with anonymity tools. He learned about the Onion Router network, software that can protect privacy by routing internet traffic through many relays. Like most technology, it can be used for legitimate reasons. Journalists use anonymity tools. Activists use them. People living under oppressive governments use them. But criminals also use them. The tool does not decide whether the purpose is good or evil. The user does. Preston used hidden networks to access violent exploitation material. He collected it, shared it, participated in communities built around cruelty. He used disturbing online names designed to shock. What began as hidden consumption became active manipulation of victims. Preston also developed a fascination with deception. He created fake identities. At first, some of his catfishing behavior looked like cruel pranks. He contacted online sellers and made absurd offers. He tricked people into traveling to places for meetings that never existed. Instead of growing bored, he escalated. The deception became more personal, more invasive, more dangerous. Eventually, Preston targeted young people. In one case, he found an online advertisement posted by a 14-year-old girl looking for babysitting work. He created a fake identity and pretended to be a girl of similar age. He slowly built trust. He claimed to be an art student. He convinced the victim to send private images under false pretenses. Then he revealed the trap. He threatened to publish the images unless she obeyed him. This was the beginning of a long period of coercion. Preston forced the girl to complete humiliating tasks. He used every new piece of material as leverage for the next demand. The victim later explained that although no one was physically standing beside her with a weapon, the fear felt just as controlling. She believed one wrong move could expose her to friends, teachers, and family. Messages came constantly. Morning, after school, night. Even when no message arrived, she waited in fear for the next one. The pressure damaged her education, her friendships, her relationship with family, her mental health. At her lowest point, she told Preston she did not want to live anymore. Instead of showing concern, he encouraged the despair. He told her the private material might already be spreading. He threatened to send it directly to people she loved. Preston kept private notes about the abuse. Those writings showed how much he enjoyed control. He described victims as experiments. He documented humiliation. He discussed increasingly cruel fantasies. Some content was so disturbing that we will not repeat it. Eventually, the girl escaped his control. The exact path is unclear. In at least one case, Preston followed through on threats and sent private material to a victim's family. The damage lasted long after the messages stopped. One victim later said that when she finally tried to explain what had happened, some relatives blamed her. That reaction deepened the trauma. Predators depend on shame. They want victims to believe nobody will understand. They want victims to think asking for help will make things worse. That is why believing victims matters. Preston did not stop with one girl. He created dozens of fake personas, different names, different ages, different personalities, each one designed for a different target. He continued the pattern for years: manipulation, trust, private material, blackmail, control. Some charges later revealed that he even forced victims to perform labor or tasks under threat. Other charges showed links to organized online groups where offenders exchanged material and methods. Investigators found what prosecutors described as predator manuals, documents explaining how to manipulate victims. One appears to have been written by someone else. Another was believed to have been created by Preston himself. It described techniques for maintaining control over multiple victims at once. Those methods spread. Other offenders downloaded similar material. That is one of the most dangerous features of online criminal communities. Predators do not operate only as individuals. They teach each other, share tactics, encourage escalation, normalize cruelty. The investigation into Preston took years. Britain's National Crime Agency became involved. So did other intelligence and law enforcement organizations from multiple countries. The scale of his offending was so serious that even international security agencies contributed resources. Investigators faced technical barriers, encrypted accounts, fake identities, anonymous email addresses, hidden networks. Some technology companies were slow to cooperate. Investigators later criticized that delay. They argued that faster assistance could have prevented additional harm. Eventually, police identified Preston. At one stage, an undercover officer secretly recorded his activity using a concealed camera. When authorities had enough evidence, they arrested him at his workplace. The man colleagues knew as a successful academic was exposed as one of the most dangerous cyber predators investigators had ever encountered. He eventually pleaded guilty to more than 100 separate offenses involving dozens of victims. The charges reflected years of abuse, coercion, illegal material, threats, organized criminal activity. He received a sentence measured in decades. A judge described him as manipulative, cruel, persistent, and deeply invested in the suffering of others. Senior prosecutors said he deliberately targeted young and vulnerable people. Several victims had attempted to end their own lives. Others had harmed themselves. Investigators emphasized the sophistication of his methods: encryption, multiple identities, anonymous communication, careful planning. One experienced officer said he had rarely seen an offender whose motivation seemed so focused on causing psychological pain. The case became a turning point for cyber investigations. Authorities realized they needed better systems for identifying offenders who hid across multiple platforms and countries. They also emphasized something essential: anyone being abused online should report it. Help exists even when a predator claims they control everything. They do not. Preston appealed his sentence. His lawyers argued that the original punishment was too severe because he had not physically touched many of his victims. That argument caused outrage. Psychological violence is still violence. Coercion can destroy lives without leaving a visible bruise. The sentence was later reduced, though authorities kept strict conditions that could extend his imprisonment if he remained dangerous. His former university also considered whether his academic qualifications could be revoked. Whatever happened to the degrees, one truth remained: removing titles cannot undo trauma. Prison cannot delete files that have already spread. A conviction cannot restore years stolen by fear. That is why the long-term challenge is bigger than punishing individual offenders. Governments and technology companies must continue finding ways to identify and remove illegal exploitation material. People often say that once something appears online, it can never truly disappear. That belief is not an excuse to stop trying. Every file removed matters to a victim. Every network shut down matters. Every offender identified matters. Every person who reports abuse, instead of hiding in shame, matters. Preston's intelligence made him especially difficult to catch. He understood how investigators thought. He changed accounts, changed identities, used encryption, separated one persona from another. Some victims never knew they were speaking to the same person. That allowed him to run several manipulation campaigns at once. One identity might appear friendly, another romantic, another professional, another threatening. He built each character around what the target wanted or feared. That sophistication is important because people often ask why victims trusted an online stranger. The better question is how much effort the offender spent creating trust. Preston researched, he waited, he mirrored language, he pretended to share interests. He made people feel seen. Only after trust existed did he begin asking for something risky. Predators rarely open with the threat. They open with connection. That is why prevention advice that simply says, "Do not trust strangers," is not enough. Many online predators stop feeling like strangers before the danger becomes obvious. They become friends, mentors, potential partners, peers, employers, people who seem to understand. By the time the first boundary is crossed, the target may already feel emotionally invested. Preston's method with the 14-year-old babysitter was a clear example. He did not begin by demanding humiliating material. He began with conversation. He created a believable identity. He used an artistic explanation. He made the request seem connected to something normal. Then once he had material, the relationship changed instantly. The friendly persona disappeared. Control replaced trust. Every demand produced new leverage. The victim felt trapped because complying once seemed to make refusal harder later. That is how coercive blackmail grows. The offender does not need physical proximity. Fear becomes the restraint. Shame becomes the locked door. Preston's private writings were especially valuable to prosecutors because they showed intent. He was not confused about the effect on victims. He knew. He documented their distress. He discussed it. He enjoyed it. That evidence answered a defense sometimes raised in online abuse cases. The idea that no physical contact means no serious harm. His victims lost sleep, stopped attending school normally, withdrew from family, developed severe anxiety. Some harmed themselves. Some tried to end their lives. The damage was physical in consequence even when the offender was miles away. The organized crime charges also revealed how online communities can strengthen offenders. A person alone may have limits. A group normalizes escalation. Members congratulate each other, share tips, trade files, teach methods. What would once have felt shocking becomes ordinary inside the group. That social reinforcement can make behavior more extreme. Investigators therefore treated Preston not only as an individual predator, but as part of a wider ecosystem. The Predator manuals were one of the clearest examples. A manual turns personal abuse into a repeatable method. It teaches someone else how to choose targets, how to gain trust, how to threaten, how to hide, how to manage multiple victims. That transforms one offender's knowledge into a tool for many. Law enforcement recognized that stopping the spread of those documents mattered almost as much as prosecuting the person who wrote them. The investigation required cooperation beyond ordinary policing. Technical experts, intelligence agencies, foreign law enforcement, platform companies, undercover officers, analysts examining metadata. The case grew so large that no single investigator could hold the entire picture. Teams specialized. One group traced accounts. Another compared victim statements. Another followed technical infrastructure. Another built the legal chain needed to introduce digital evidence in court. The process took years because Preston had left traces across many services. Some companies responded quickly, others did not. Investigators later complained that certain technology firms failed to understand the seriousness until shown disturbing evidence directly. That delay became part of a larger debate. How much responsibility should technology companies carry when abuse happens through their systems? There is no simple answer. Platforms cannot prevent every crime. But when credible evidence exists, delay can create more victims. Preston continued offending while investigators were still trying to obtain information. That fact haunted people who worked the case. Eventually, undercover surveillance helped close the gap. An officer used a concealed recording device to capture Preston, using systems connected to the offending. That evidence linked the respected academic to the hidden identities. When police arrested him at work, colleagues were stunned. The contrast was enormous. A researcher, a lecturer, a man with advanced degrees, a person described as funny and sociable. Then the list of charges. More than 100 offenses, dozens of victims. The case destroyed the comforting idea that dangerous predators always look dangerous. They often do not. They look employable, educated, friendly, normal. That is why behavior matters more than image. During sentencing, the judge focused on cruelty and planning. This was not impulsive misconduct. It was sustained, organized, repeated. The prosecution emphasized that Preston deliberately selected vulnerable targets. He used technology not simply to hide, but to increase control. His appeal later argued that the original sentence was excessive because much of the abuse was remote. The reduction that followed angered many people. Victims and advocates argued that physical distance should not reduce the seriousness of deliberate psychological torture. Authorities responded by emphasizing that release would depend on future risk. If Preston remained dangerous, he could be held longer. The university debate raised another difficult question. What should institutions do with honors earned by someone later convicted of serious crimes? Removing a degree may express condemnation. It does not undo the education. Leaving the degree may feel offensive to victims. There was little precedent. The issue became symbolic. But symbols matter because institutions communicate values through what they honor. Still, victims were clear about what mattered more than academic titles. Remove the material. Find the other offenders. Protect future victims. Do not let shame isolate people. Believe those who come forward. That is the practical work that can reduce harm. The final story began not with an anonymous message, but with a modeling job. Sienna Hart grew up in South London. She was raised by a single mother who worked hard to give her every opportunity she could. Sienna did well in school. She studied subjects that could have led toward university and a professional career. She once imagined becoming a lawyer. Then her life changed when she became pregnant while still very young. She left school. Suddenly, she had a child to think about, a mother she wanted to help, and an uncertain future. Sienna refused to give up. She had always enjoyed athletics and physical training, so she began studying toward a sports science qualification that could lead to stable work. During that period, a modeling agent approached her. He suggested she build a portfolio. Sienna tried it. The early shoots went well. Her photographs received attention. Eventually, she signed with a well-known modeling agency run by Graham Bell. Graham had worked in the industry for decades. His reputation was controversial. He had connections. He arranged parties. He represented models. Critics sometimes questioned the culture around his business, although previous investigations had not established criminal conduct. Then Graham received a call from a man using the name Andre Laszlo. The caller wanted to hire one of his models for a photo shoot in Europe. Graham selected Sienna. The first planned shoot was cancelled at the last moment. The supposed client apologized and said he would reorganize later. Eventually, another job was offered, this time in Milan. Sienna traveled to Italy. There was one enormous problem. Andre Laszlo did not exist. The booking was part of a kidnapping scheme. When Sienna failed to return home as expected, her mother became terrified. She contacted Graham. He tried calling the supposed client. No answer. Then an email arrived. The message claimed Sienna had been taken by an organization calling itself the Black Death Group. The email demanded hundreds of thousands of euros in cryptocurrency. If the ransom was not paid, it said, Sienna would be sold through a hidden online auction. Graham immediately contacted British officials in Milan. Italian police began investigating. They raided the location believed to have been used as the photography studio. It was not a professional studio. It was a poor, largely abandoned apartment. No electricity. Little evidence of normal occupation. Police found clothing belonging to Sienna, but almost nothing else. No useful digital trail. No clear suspect. No obvious place to search next. For a terrifying period, it seemed as if Sienna had simply vanished. Then, less than a week later, a young woman walked into the British consulate in Milan. It was Sienna. She was accompanied by a Polish computer programmer named Damian Kroll. Police separated them immediately. Then the story began to unfold. Sienna explained that on the day she disappeared, she had traveled by taxi to what she believed was the location of a modeling shoot. The building was isolated. That did not immediately seem suspicious. Modeling shoots often happen in warehouses, industrial spaces, empty offices, places that look unimpressive from the outside but contain equipment inside. Sienna entered the building. Printed signs pointed toward a room. When she approached, someone grabbed her from behind. A hand covered her mouth. Another person appeared. She was injected with a sedative. She fought, then lost consciousness. When Sienna woke, she was trapped inside a large bag in the back of a moving vehicle. Her wrists and ankles were restrained. Her mouth had been covered. She was disoriented from the drugs. She found a small opening, managed to work at it, realized it was a zipper. Eventually, she got enough space to breathe and move. She kicked and screamed. The vehicle stopped. The trunk opened. Two masked men stood above her. She begged for answers. They gave none. They restrained her again, closed the bag, continued driving. Later, the vehicle stopped in a more isolated place. There were no city lights. only darkness. Sienna was terrified. She cried for her mother, for her baby. She did not know whether she would ever see either of them again. She was taken to a farmhouse. For a period, she was restrained in a basement and given limited food and water. She was still suffering from the effects of the sedative. Eventually, one captor appeared without a mask, young face, close-cropped hair, pale eyes. He tried to speak to her calmly. This was Damien. Sienna understood quickly that survival depended on reading him carefully. She did not challenge him unnecessarily. She tried to build sympathy. She talked about her infant son. She cried honestly. She let Damien see her as a mother, a person, not an object. Then Damien made a strange request. He asked whether she might consider dating him. Sienna was horrified, but she realized immediately that the question revealed something she could use. She pretended to consider the possibility, not because she wanted him, because she wanted to live. She later explained that she had one strategy: make him care enough not to hurt her. Damien began believing she might actually like him. That belief changed the power between them. Sienna asked his name. He told her, Damien Kroll. She had encountered him before, without remembering clearly. During the earlier cancelled photo shoot, a man had been sent to assist with travel expenses. That man had been Damien. Eventually, Damien told Sienna an elaborate story. He claimed to be part of a violent trafficking organization called the Black Death Group. He said he wanted to leave. He claimed he needed hundreds of thousands of euros to buy his freedom. He told Sienna she had originally been targeted earlier, but he had supposedly refused because she was a mother. He claimed his superiors punished him, then ordered another kidnapping. According to Damien, he had secretly decided to protect her, but he needed ransom money. He warned Sienna that other members of the organization were everywhere. If she escaped, they would find her. If he betrayed them, they would kill him. If the ransom failed, she would be sold. The stories were designed to terrify her, and they worked. Sienna believed much of what he said. That belief shaped every decision she made. Damien asked who might be able to pay. Sienna named wealthy people connected to her professional life. A ransom demand was sent to Graham Bell. The email included those names. The requested amount was enormous. At least one possible contact might have been able to raise a smaller amount quickly. It was nowhere near the demand. Then Damien did something strange. He released Sienna anyway. He still tried to impose conditions. More cryptocurrency later. Publicity for the supposed Black Death Group. Promises that Sienna would help spread fear of the organization in the United Kingdom. Sienna agreed to everything. She planned to abandon every promise as soon as she was safely home. Damien drove her back toward Milan, but his behavior there created questions. He had told Sienna that the Black Death Group had agents everywhere, that escape was impossible, that the city was being watched. Yet, once they returned to Milan, he behaved casually. They went to a cafe. They walked through public spaces. He even bought her shoes. Then he escorted her toward the British consulate. Damien seemed to believe he could simply leave after dropping her off. When officials asked him to come inside, he showed little fear. Police interviewed them separately. During Sienna's interview, investigators discovered inconsistencies. She said the clothes she was wearing had been provided during captivity. Then police learned the shoes had just been purchased. Security camera footage showed Sienna and Damien walking together. At one point, they appeared to be holding hands. Sienna had not mentioned those details. The omission damaged her credibility. She later explained that she had already been talking for hours. She was exhausted. She believed explaining every strange moment would prolong the interview. She also understood her own behavior differently from outside observers. To police, holding hands with a kidnapper looked suspicious. To Sienna, it was part of the survival strategy she had been using for days. After she returned home, public suspicion grew. Some journalists suggested the kidnapping had been staged. Some investigators questioned whether she had cooperated willingly. People analyzed her behavior as though there were a correct way to act after being abducted. Why did she not run? Why did she go to a cafe? Why did she accept shoes? Why did she stay near Damien? Sienna tried to explain, When someone controls your freedom, your understanding of safety changes. The person holding you captive can also become the person you believe is keeping worse danger away. Sienna genuinely believed other members of the Black Death group might be nearby. She feared that leaving Damien could expose her to something worse. That fear may not have been based on reality, but it was real inside her mind. She later said she would rather have behaved carefully and survived than acted in the way strangers believed a kidnapping victim should. As investigators dug deeper, the truth became stranger. The powerful Black Death group Damien described did not exist, at least not in the form he claimed. There had been online scammers using that name. They were involved in low-level cybercrime, but they were not the international trafficking empire Damien described. The supposed online slave auction connected to Sienna was also fake. Damien had worked with online criminals to create images and pages designed to make the threat look real. He needed Sienna to believe the organization was powerful. Fear was part of the kidnapping. Nolan Mercer, the same cybercrime researcher who investigated dark web murder for hire sites, later studied the Black Death claims. He concluded that the group had been greatly exaggerated. Damien was not a soldier in a massive criminal organization. He was a dangerous and selfish man, using fiction as a weapon. At trial, Damien changed his story. He claimed the entire incident had been staged to help Sienna's modeling career. He suggested she was his girlfriend. He tried to use public suspicion against her. The jury rejected that defense. He was convicted and received a long prison sentence. His brother, Marek Kroll, was later accused of helping with the kidnapping. Digital and email evidence tied him to the planning. He was extradited to Italy. He too received a lengthy sentence. The case remained controversial because Sienna's behavior did not match what many people expected from a kidnapping victim. That expectation became part of the story. People wanted fear to look a certain way. They wanted victims to fight at obvious moments, run at obvious moments, refuse contact, refuse kindness. Reject the captor openly. Real survival is rarely that simple. Victims read danger moment by moment. They comply, pretend, negotiate, build sympathy, say things they do not mean. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they hold a hand. Sometimes they accept food. Sometimes they tell a captor exactly what he wants to hear. Because staying alive matters more than appearing believable later. Sienna understood that Damien wanted affection, so she gave him the illusion of affection. Damien believed he was manipulating her. In reality, she was manipulating him too. Not for money, not for fame, for survival. That is why the story became a battle of competing bluffs. Damien created a fake criminal empire to control Sienna through fear. Sienna created a fake emotional connection to convince Damien that releasing her might lead to something he wanted. He believed his lie was stronger. Hers saved her life. Sienna's case became a public lesson in how badly outsiders misunderstand survival behavior. People expected kidnapping to look like a movie. A victim runs whenever a door opens, screams whenever strangers appear, refuses food, refuses conversation, fights until physically overpowered. Real captivity is more complicated. Sienna had already been drugged, restrained, transported inside a vehicle, threatened with a criminal organization she believed had international reach. She believed people were watching. She believed escape could trigger worse consequences. Her nervous system adapted to that reality. Damien became both captor and supposed protector. That contradiction is psychologically powerful. A hostage may begin depending on the same person who controls them, not because the relationship is healthy, because survival options are limited. Sienna's decision to appear affectionate toward Damien was strategic. She saw that he wanted emotional validation. He wanted to imagine himself not as a kidnapper, but as a misunderstood man who might be loved. Sienna fed that fantasy. She did not need acting training. She needed awareness. Every conversation became negotiation. Every expression mattered. Too much fear might make him feel rejected. Too much enthusiasm might seem fake. She had to remain believable. That was exhausting. The strange shopping trip in Milan later became evidence used against her in the court of public opinion. Why accept shoes from a kidnapper? Why sit in a cafe? Why walk beside him? Why hold his hand? Because by then, Sienna believed Damien was the only barrier between her and the terrifying organization he had invented. He had spent days building that belief. He told her agents were everywhere, that escape routes were monitored, that people who disobeyed disappeared. So when he behaved casually in public, Sienna did not instantly conclude the story was fake. Fear does not disappear just because the environment changes. The mind carries captivity with it. Even after the door opens, police had legitimate reasons to question inconsistencies. Investigators must test stories. They cannot accept every claim without examination. The problem came when questioning turned into assumptions about how a victim should behave. Sienna's failure to mention the shoe purchase looked suspicious. Her explanation was ordinary. She was exhausted. She had already been interviewed for hours. She did not understand that the detail would matter. Memory after trauma is not a perfect recording. People remember fragments. Sequence can blur. Details that seem important to police may feel meaningless to the person who survived. That does not mean every inconsistency should be ignored. It means inconsistency alone does not prove deception. Media attention intensified everything. Television interviews turned Sienna into both victim and suspect in the public imagination. Commentators analyzed her face, her tone, her clothing, her decisions. Some people decided she had staged the entire event before the criminal case was even resolved. That public skepticism became useful to Damien. At trial, he tried to transform the suspicion into a defense. He claimed the kidnapping was part of a publicity plan, a fake scandal, a career stunt. He portrayed Sienna as a willing participant. The evidence did not support him. The jury rejected the story. Digital records showed planning, the fake identity, the arranged photo shoot, the ransom messages, the involvement of his brother, the physical evidence, the criminal infrastructure he had fabricated to frighten Sienna. Damien's lie collapsed under detail. The Black Death Group myth was itself fascinating. There really had been online users using that name, but their criminal activity was far less powerful than Damien claimed. They were not an all-seeing international trafficking syndicate. Damien borrowed the name because fear works better when it sounds organized. A lone kidnapper is frightening. A global network feels impossible to escape. He understood branding. He used internet rumors as psychological weapons. The fake auction pages were part of that performance. Screenshots made the threat look official. Cryptocurrency made it look connected to the dark web. Anonymous emails made it feel international. The entire structure was theater, dangerous theater. Nolan Mercer's research helped separate reality from fiction. He examined the sites, the technical history, the claims, the screenshots. His conclusion was that the supposed organization had been exaggerated dramatically. That did not make Sienna's kidnapping fake. It made Damien's manipulation more elaborate. This distinction became important. A victim can believe a false threat. The threat can still control them. If someone points an unloaded gun at a person who believes it is loaded, the fear is real. Damien's fake organization worked the same way. Sienna believed. That belief shaped her behavior. His brother Marek's involvement also showed the kidnapping was not simply a spontaneous romantic obsession. Communication records and forensic evidence linked more than one person to planning and logistics. The legal cases resulted in long prison sentences. Those convictions became the clearest answer to people who insisted Sienna had invented everything. The courts did not accept the hoax defense. The case still remains complicated because human behavior is complicated. Sienna was both deceived and deceptive. She believed Damien's lies, then told him lies of her own. She pretended affection, pretended possibility, pretended a future. That deception helped her survive. Damien thought manipulation belonged only to him. He was wrong. Sienna used his emotional weakness against him. That is not a romantic story. It is a survival story. These stories are different. A murder request on the dark web, a child exploitation network, a cyber predator hiding behind dozens of identities, a kidnapping built around a fictional criminal organization. But they share something important. The internet allows people to become invisible in ways that can magnify both cruelty and courage. A person sitting alone at a computer can make a threat against someone thousands of miles away. A predator can create fake identities. A criminal can move money without meeting a victim. An abuser can build a lie so convincing that fear does the work for them. But anonymity is never perfect. There are always traces, language habits, payment records, screenshots, server mistakes, messages, witnesses, victims who remember, investigators who refuse to stop, people like Nolan Mercer, who look at something everyone else dismisses as a scam and ask one more question. Police officers who compare files across borders, cyber investigators who follow cryptocurrency, victims who survive long enough to tell the story, and sometimes accomplices who finally decide they cannot keep participating. There is another lesson here too. Not every person who appears calm is safe. Not every victim reacts in the way outsiders expect. Fear can look like silence, compliance, politeness, even cooperation. Avery Stone kept looking over her shoulder because she did not know who the danger was. Rachel Alden believed the man protecting her was the man who had ordered her death. Children exploited by Victor Sawyer often came from families who believed they were sending them to legitimate work. Preston Vale's victims believed fake identities because trust had been built slowly. Sienna Hart stayed close to Damien because she believed separation might be more dangerous than staying. That is why judgment should come slowly. Compassion should come first. When someone says they are being threatened, blackmailed, stalked, exploited, or controlled, the safest first response is not blame. It is listening. Ask what they need. Preserve evidence. Tell someone trustworthy. Contact law enforcement or a qualified support service when appropriate. Do not tell victims they should have known better. Predators depend on that shame. They depend on silence. They depend on victims believing that one mistake means they no longer deserve help. They do. People also need to understand that the dark web is not a magical hidden universe separate from ordinary life. It is technology. Some people use privacy tools for legitimate reasons. Others use the same tools to hide crimes. The danger comes from human choices, not from software alone. And the same is true of cryptocurrency. A digital wallet can support legitimate commerce. It can also be used by someone trying to hide payment for violence. Again, the tool is not the conscience. The person is. The most hopeful part of these stories is that cruelty does not have the final word automatically. Sometimes a hacker finds the file. Sometimes a victim survives. Sometimes a witness changes sides. Sometimes a police officer believes the person standing in front of them. Sometimes investigators in different countries decide bureaucracy matters less than protecting a child. Sometimes a frightened young woman learns that pretending to trust her captor may be the safest path home. None of that erases what happened. Justice cannot return lost years. A conviction cannot remove every image from the internet. A prison sentence cannot make a victim forget. But accountability still matters. It tells victims that what happened to them was real, that it was wrong, that the shame belongs to the offender, not to them. And forgiveness, when it becomes possible, does not mean forgetting. It does not mean minimizing. It can simply mean refusing to let the offender control the rest of your life. For survivors, healing rarely moves in a straight line. There may be fear years later, anger, confusion, guilt that does not belong to them. The important thing is that survival itself is not something to apologize for. Whatever safe choice got someone through the moment deserves understanding. For the rest of us, there is responsibility too. Be careful with strangers online. Protect personal information. Question people who rush intimacy. Be suspicious of anyone who asks for secrecy early. Save threatening messages. Do not send money or private material because someone uses fear to create urgency. And if someone confides in you, do not punish them for trusting you. Listen first. Help them reach people who can protect them. If these stories leave any lesson behind, let it be this. Technology can hide a face. It cannot erase responsibility. Power can frighten people into silence. It cannot make cruelty right. And evil often survives because people assume somebody else will deal with it. The opposite is also true. One warning can save a life. One screenshot can expose a network. One report can begin an investigation. One person choosing to speak can open a door that has been locked for years. So stay alert. Stay compassionate. Do not let fear turn you cruel. Do not let embarrassment keep you silent. And never assume that because a crime happens behind a screen, its victims are any less real. Every account has a person behind it. Every threat has consequences. Every victim deserves to be seen as a human being before they are seen as a headline. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who believes online danger is not real, simply because it happens through a screen. And if you know someone who is being threatened, blackmailed, stalked, exploited, or controlled online, remind them of something predators desperately want them to forget. They are not alone. There is help. There are people who will believe them. And asking for help is not weakness. Sometimes it is the first act of taking your life back.